All right, welcome. It's not that big a room, I should be able to hear somebody. Good morning. All right. My name is Matt Gibbs. I'm the development manager for ASP.NET, including some stuff we're doing for Silverlight 1.1. By way of background, I started on classic ASP in 1997, and I've been doing web platform stuff at Microsoft ever since. It's come a long way, I think, but we still have more things we're trying to do. You should feel free, to a reasonable degree, to interrupt me. I'm the middle child of 11, so interruptions are kind of par for the course. And as we go through some of the stuff today, there are places where if it's not clear what I mean, then remember I'm not a professional speaker. Just get me to clarify, because I'm a dev guy. We have some demos. I have a little bit of kind of a where are we now, what are you guys doing, what is the ASP.NET team up to, and we'll walk through kind of a set of different features, focusing kind of on the AdventureWorks database as a theme, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a whole cohesive thing to go through the different parts of what we're building. So, what do I want to show today? I want to show, in preview form, improvements we're making to the web platform. The couple of pillars that we've been focused on the team have been make it easier to write richer applications. And you've seen some of this in the past with the Ajax library, that you could do richer, more complex things on the client. We're trying to push that further based on feedback that we have from you about things you'd like help with in the platform. The other thing we're trying to do is make data access easier. There have historically been several controls. We've introduced a data source model into ASP.NET. Now there's link. The SQL team is providing entities. Like, there's a bunch of different things going on with data. We consistently hear, make it easier for me to control what data I'm accessing, to update it, because really my applications are about data. Through that all, we've tried to maintain a focus on standards compliance. We've come a long way here too. We're trying to work better to produce XHTML, make it easier for you to use CSS. We are fully aware that the existing web forms controls are not exactly CSS friendly, and we're working to make things better going forward in the short term and a little bit in the longer term. We also have tried in this new set of features to make sure that you can control through customization, inheritance, interfaces, what you're doing, how you can control the platform more. For example, even something as basic as the HTTP context that is floating around there during all the page execution, we're replacing with an iHTTP context so that it can be mocked. I don't mean make fun of it. I mean that you can substitute it for another implementation for testing. We're going to do that with response and request as well, so that you can pursue things like test-driven development more easily with ASP.NET. The agenda. So briefly, I'll do a little bit of a, not so much a long-term release roadmap, but more kind of here's where we are and here's where we're going to go in the short term. And then I'm just going to go through a set of different features, trying to demo as much as we can in the time we have, and again, answering questions as we go. So there should be a couple spots for people to ask questions. If they're not live yet, just yell and I'll stop and shield from the light and try to get the questions as we go. There's a top-level set of features we have too. How many people have heard of Astoria? Great number. And of course, we're doing more stuff with Ajax. Like I said, the Silverlight work that we're doing is kind of twofold. Part of our team is working on Silverlight 1.1, which you may not have seen a lot about yet. When we get there, I'll talk a little bit about that, as well as Silverlight controls. So you have ASP.NET targeting Silverlight. The dynamic data controls, this is evolved from a prototype you may have seen out there, codenamed Oryx, if you've seen that. It's also born out of another prototype that Polita Huff on the team did called Blink. So if you've seen those, you'll see kind of the next evolution of that. And MVC, how many people have heard of MVC? Good, a fair number. How many people are using MVC right now? Also a fair number. Okay, and we'll dig into that. And there are a little bit of complexities associated with MVC if you haven't been looking at it before, and with how we're trying to approach it, make it easier for ASP.NET to offer a bunch of facilities there. So when we get there, be sure to ask questions. The ASP.NET futures. So in the past, we've tried to get more agile about having work that we, the ASP.NET team, are doing in your hands sooner. So you can give us feedback and we can help get things right for the release. So we've been doing that in something called the ASP.NET Futures. You can go to the www.asp.net site, you can download it, you can play with it, you can put it on your server, and then a few months later, another Futures release comes out that may or may not have everything the same way that it was before. You also saw in the past that we did a bunch of like the Ajax work and that it came into the .NET framework. So Ajax released out of band from the .NET framework major release, and now with this release, the .NET framework gets all that Ajax functionality. And as I said, some stuff will just continue to go forward into the next release. What we're going to do in the next month is something a little new for the ASP.NET Futures, in that we're taking things that we've gotten your feedback on as not being something that we should continue investing in, but that has interesting aspects of it that you might like to continue playing with. So can you please have the code? So we're looking at taking a few things in there that we don't think are going to belong in the platform, but that people have an interest in, and we're going to put them on CodePlex. Release roadmap. As a refresher, Ajax 1.0 went into the framework, like we called out. And sorry if I call it Orcus, we get stuck in these code names. What we're doing, the features you're going to see today, what we're doing is releasing a tech preview of those in the next month. Now, some of those features exist today in the futures. So we'll release another build of the futures at the same time, but this tech preview is clearly, this is the set of feature work that needs to go on the platform, and we need to move it onto a more stable place, really focus on productizing it, some of the process we go around there for localization, globalization, really bring it up to the full quality we need to make it part of the .NET framework. So at some time in the near future, the CTP features that you see today and then have in the next month will get folded into the .NET framework. This most likely will not be a full side-by-side release of the .NET framework. This would be folded in out of band, so potentially service pack kind of time frame in it comes. And I know there's some questions about, hey, you're taking features and putting them in a service pack. We're maintaining the same way we did for Orcus, a really high bar, and there may be some new feature work added on top. But because it would be an existing version of the .NET framework, backwards compatibility is kind of forefront in our mind. In fact, there's been some confusion. There's a couple of blog posts that describe it. Soma has one that goes into detail about the philosophy behind it. But to kind of get a little better grip, let me run through quickly what we've done to date with major releases of the .NET framework. We released version 1. Not that long after, we released version 1.1, which was a side-by-side release, meaning you didn't automatically go from 1.0 to 1.1. If you had an app, it could keep running side-by-side with a new app you created for version 1.1. A couple years later, we released version 2.0, which had a lot of great new features, and it's still 2.0. The release of the .NET framework that is releasing shortly, end of the month, is for system web and ASP.NET is still 2.0. What's happened is that since the 2.0 framework released, the 3.0 framework released, which was additive features, Windows Presentation Foundation, workflow, they got added on top of 2.0, and it was called 3.0. But your 2.0 app was still the same. Now with this release coming in a few weeks, you have .NET Framework 3.5. But for ASP.NET, it is still, at the core runtime, System.web 2.0. The idea behind it was that it's not going to be a full side-by-side release that you would want to target 2.0 and something new. It's do some critical fixes to 2.0 and layer on new features like the list view and the AJAX features. So if you hear somebody talking about would you use 3.5, upgrade your 2.0 site to a 3.5 site, at the core, it's the same. It's additive features on top with some critical changes that we needed underneath. Okay, Astoria Data Services, in a nutshell, is REST access to your data. The data is identified in a uniform set of URLs that are familiar. As you look at them, you can get a reflection of what your underlying data model is. The actual format used to transmit between client and server can be modified. The storage that you use in the back end can be changed. It doesn't need to be SQL. It can be some other database. And it's key that it integrates with existing HTTP infrastructure because it is just gets and posts over the web. What it's really trying to feature for people is this tier that sits between your application logic and your model so that you get a reflection of that in a web service. The team is producing client libraries that will work for Silverlight as well as the .NET Framework and AJAX, and we'll take a look at an example of that. We're integrating into ASP.NET the Astoria feature, so it's a first-class citizen. You can have access to data on remote servers through an Astoria data service or through these client libraries. Let's take a quick look at it. I have an existing website, or project actually. AW service, Astoria Web Service is what that's supposed to stand for. And I open that up. In here, you see that I have in my web config a connection string into an AdventureWorks database. And I also have this AdventureWorks service file. So this is a Windows Communication Foundation service. It's already pre-created here as we've been early on doing some tweaks to get feedback into the team about stuff that hasn't been working quite as well as we'd like yet. Here's where we are, that it's already pre-set up for me. Normally you would go in and say add new item, add an ADO.NET data service, and then let it access the backend data model. Currently in the CTP that we'll have out next month, it will be Astoria Data Services focusing on entity framework. We're also looking at some ways to enable things for link to SQL with easy examples too. So you can pick whichever one you're currently using and start leveraging Astoria soon. The other thing we have in here is a page that we'll look at that can access the services easily. So if I just go in here to access it, one other thing to note is that in this file, by default, the consensus has been I may have a data model and I may want to use Astoria, but if it's present and available, do not ever just start exposing my data over web services. So you have to opt in. The default here is going to be none, meaning that none of the REST access would work until you go configure it for what kind of enumeration you want. And we'll just say all for now. And if I go request this website, come on, just say browse this. Then it requests the Astoria web service. And I have a bunch of XML that is describing the backend data of AdventureWorks. See, I have a bunch of entity sets for the different tables that are in the backend data. A little hard to see there. But you have address, customer, product categories, the basic top-level info you have about your data set. Now, if we switch this, here's where it starts to get more interesting. We can say, I don't want just this top-level view. What I would like to see are all the product categories. except I still need the Astoria Web Service. Product categories. And it'll go back against that data and select for me the product category as well as all the info. So I didn't have to write any code in the Astoria Web Service. It took care of it for me. I didn't have to do anything other than just turn on exposing it. Okay, well, this isn't that much different than if I just wrote some quick set of 10 lines to do a query against my database and expose it. But you get more flexibility than that. I say I want product category, and I happen to know that at this point, after looking at the database a while, product category 5 is mountain bikes. Okay, so in my AdventureWorks database, I have mountain bikes, and I have some other related data that is on the back end related to mountain bikes. In fact, it gives me an href here that points out to me that I could go look at all of the products in the mountain bikes category. So if I just add on the end there, products, sure enough, I get all of the mountain bikes. Lots and lots of them. Scroll through, and this one's some silver mountain bike. This one's a different silver mountain bike. I have all this data. Okay, interesting. It's actually understanding the relationships in the back-end data. It's letting me query against specific IDs within the database. And I can take that even further when I say, I would like to filter over that data. So in my query string, I'll say, I only want a filter of all of the colors in that table where it's equal to silver. Well, we're already looking at silver. Let's pick something else. Yellow. Must not be yellow ones. Pretty sure there's yellow ones. Let's try black. Color equals, that's because I'm not typing it right. Color equals black. Come on. Get all the products. There we go. Now, I have just the black mountain bikes. And you can see that I can take that syntax further by doing things like saying, and I would like just the top 4. Maybe I'm doing client-side paging of this. I don't need an intermediary on the server to manage where I'm at in it. I can let something like a JavaScript library say, every time they click next, go get the next 10, and maintain a counter there. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4 mountain bikes. In a nutshell, that is what you get from simply saying, I would like to enable Astoria Web Services, give me an Astoria Web Service, and turn it on. We can push this a little further by saying, well, that's great, I have all this, but I still have to consume it somehow, and right now it's just a big XML blob. So I have this products color file, basic HTML page, and we'll go look at the script in a second. I've said in here, I have a script reference to the Microsoft Ajax library that gives me proxies for Ajax data services. It gives me an Ajax proxy for the data services, rather. I ask the person to input a color, and I have a button where I have a JavaScript handler that says, when they click on this button, go run the list products code. And up here at the top, I have a JavaScript function that's called list products. I go get a div. I tell the user that I'm loading. I grab the value from the text box they've put in. And here I create that proxy simply by calling the Ajax class library, so sys.data.dataService, and give it the path. And then I can fill that same kind of query as I was putting on the in the URL. I say products, filter color equals whatever the color is they gave me, and I give it a callback for when it's completed, as well as something to do if it fails. Not real robust error handling, I must admit, to just tell them it failed. It has to be asynchronous. We don't support synchronous access to this. The reason being that if something goes wrong, you tie up the thread in the browser, and the user's only recourse is to kill the browser and start it over again. In our experience, users get very confused when their browsers just stop working. So in the callback, I get a string builder. I go over the results that it's given me, append a bunch of list items for it, and add it to that HTML. So with just a few lines of code, I'm now consuming the Astoria data service. And if we run that, we can see that I can pick a color. I swear there are yellow ones in there. No, and since I didn't do anything, I'll have to look at, oh, I'm spelling it wrong. Maybe I keep spelling it wrong. There we go. I knew there were yellow bikes. I've looked at this data long enough. And so it's just a few lines of code. I'm now consuming data from my database using this well-known format, standardized, and with very few lines of code. One of the keys to note here is that the libraries we're developing will let you do access to REST services from JavaScript, from Silverlight, and from server-side code through Astoria data source as well. So you can build mashup apps for places that start exposing data this way. Okay, other feature work. We've also gone into what we've done with Ajax and looked at ways that we need to make this a little better. So historically, there's been two kinds of ways that people have approached the ASP.NET Ajax library. They've said, I don't want to write JavaScript. I don't care about JavaScript. I don't want to put a bunch of client-side code that tries to take care of my application logic. I just don't want this constant going back to the server to be an interruption to my user. So what they have there is the update panel. You simply wrap regions of content in your page with the update panel, and the page executes, but it does it behind the scenes, and the Ajax library updates the affected regions for you. The other approach is to say, I do want to do all that stuff on the client, and good thing that the ASP.NET Ajax library gives me a pattern for doing things like classes. I can do inheritance. I get error handling, a bunch of the support that we've built in there. So what we're adding has been things that we found to be shortcomings. Remember I said that when Ajax shipped, it was after 2.0 of the framework shipped, and now we've made some critical fixes. One of the things we've done is to take controls that by the way they were written, they just didn't work with the update panel and fixed them. We have new validators, tree view, menu, and web parts. Web parts have also been improved in this release so that they work better in Firefox. You used to get a down-level experience there. We've made that a more first-class citizen. It's key to note that with all of our Ajax work, there are more than Internet Explorer as first-class citizens. We test against Internet Explorer, we test against Firefox, and we test against Safari. We've also added the list view. And this goes to that key pillar I talked about that said we want people to have more flexibility and customizability. The list view is a data control that tries to do a little less so that you can do more. And what I mean by that is instead of as many complicated things for templating to get the exact look you want with access to your data, the list view takes more the approach of you pull in the pieces you want and have full customizability for it. Embraces CSS. Now in the CTP, for the next release, we have logical navigation. What do I mean by this? When you're doing these out-of-band communications with the server, you end up in situations where the user confuses the back button with state transitions they've made in their page. For example, this happened to me. My wife was shopping on the grocery store website, carefully going through what we needed, what was on sale, and this great Ajax app was carefully filling up her shopping cart. And she changed her mind about something and clicked back in the browser and lost her entire shopping cart. Since that time, I just end up running to the store for things that are missing or needed because they've lost that user from using their website for probably a good time to come. What we've added are some simple primitives that server-side and client-side let you control this. So whether you're doing things more like the update panel style, or whether you're doing things in core JavaScript in the application itself, in the browser, then you get control of it here so you can manage what that user's experience is. The general rule of thumb is that anytime you would put something in the history is also the kind of time when you'd want someone to bookmark it. So you can end up kind of abusing this if you say, too many state transitions end up as bookmarks. It also doesn't make sense to the user because then they're just navigating through things that don't look like state transitions to them. Permalinks. Permalinks is the idea that at some point in your page, a user may want to share what they're looking at with someone else, or bookmark that kind of thing, or mail it, kind of. Permalinks with state so it can be restored. The common example I've seen here are things like I'm browsing through looking at real estate, I find some interesting thing I want to share with someone, I cut and paste a URL, and it doesn't get them back to the same house, it gets them to the default site of the realtor. Permalinks make this easy so that you can put in your page simple tags, so bookmark this, or mail this, or copy this. The permalink feature is not in the CTP. Some of this is still work that we have going on. Logical navigation is in the CTP, permalink's not there yet. All right, let's take a look at it. I open my website that has history. And we'll see I have this history page that has just a basic wizard. So I have an ASP wizard control. I have wizard steps for, surprise, surprise, it's selecting things out of the AdventureWorks database. So first, hey, I want to pick what kind of bike I want, and then the next step, I want to pick a color, and then finally, I want to select a size of bike. And then this, just so we can see what's going on, is I'm spitting out the date and time. And if I go browse this, we get an example of what the problem is. I decide that I want a touring bike. I never updated my clock, so probably time for coffee soon. I pick a touring bike. I say I want, well, great, except it's doing full postbacks with this. But I am getting history support. It's all called navigation sample. Also not exactly helpful to the user, because if they want to pick something that makes any sense, having every state transition be the same name isn't exactly a classy experience. So we'll look at how we can fix that too. First, I just do the simple update panel to Ajaxify the site. Put in some content. I'm still spitting out the time, but outside the update panel. So you can see that it's actually going back to the server asynchronously and getting the data. So I run that. And now I can do the same kind of thing where I select what I want. But my time doesn't update as I navigate back and forth through this. I still get the same control through the states that you'd expect from the wizard managing that for me. But I have no history information whatsoever. This doesn't highlight, like if I went to my home site and then went to that URL, you can see it does end up with some history info for the GET request for it, and then the error. But as I navigate through it, then I don't get any kind of updates. And if I go back to my history, I'm back to a stateless point. So what we add are a couple of things here to turn this on. First, so enable history you have to turn on. The overhead associated with the extra scripts, we realize not everyone's going to want up front to pay that penalty. So you have to indicate explicitly that you want it. On navigate, we're saying, called the on navigate event. And it's also worth noting that the wizard step has now declared that when the active step changes, I also want to run code. The donut. Hang on. There we go. We don't want design view. I I'm more of a source code view kind of guy. So, at the top of this file we have, first just a key we use for accessing things for a key value pair. And notice that this is server code. So when the active step changes, I check that the user isn't navigating, because if they're navigating, navigating being the history manager doing it for them, then I don't want to start adding extra things into their history, because they're already navigating to a point they've already been in their history. I grab the index, and I add a history point for it, giving it just this step key information, and then the index that I want to store, for which step I want. Now, when I add this history point, what it immediately triggers is navigation is occurring here. So I can go grab the same data that I just stored in there, and I check that I have this state information I need, parse it into the type I want, and then set the active step index of the wizard back to what it was when they did this navigation. So when they click something in that history to say I want to go back to this, the active step hasn't changed. Instead, only the navigate event is firing. I pull the state information from it and restore it to where they were at that point in the wizard. A key thing to note here is that guidance is don't abuse what you put in here, because it all appears on the query string. So the more you put in here, the more ugly the URL is, as well as implications for actually hitting the limit for what you can store in the URL. Currently about 1K, I think. So you'd have to get pretty abusive, but it's a GET request. Everything's there. So that's all the code I have, and my example then gets better. I still get the experience of not updating the full page, but I get an entry each time into my navigation. And I've also got more context information because I can control what the name is that's put in there. So I can go back to the start or have different steps I can navigate to, and the state information is maintained for me. Much better with just a few lines of code and enabling history. This experience ends up being, for the user, much more intuitive in terms of state transitions are reflected in the browser. They don't distinguish oftentimes that the browser is not keeping up with the state as they see it in their mind. So that was server side. So we also have client side for this. The code's a little bit more complex, and I've taken away using the wizard. Instead, what I'm going to do is send down just different divs where I control the visibility. So instead of wizard steps, I just have divs, and then the same selections of items for the bikes. And I've added an init event that sets up the fact that I want to watch for client click on the buttons in those different divs. And I've also added the client-side version of that navigate event. So when the person does some kind of navigation, I want this event to fire. So when they click on one of the divs, I have the handler. It says, give me the value that they're clicking on. It just pulls it from the data. And on the client, I add that history point. And I store the page client state along with this val. So again, I can restore state at a later point. And then I get the page navigate function, where I pull that state back again, just like I did on the server. In this case, I say, well, at this point, I'm setting a navigation point. I'm going to move them to the next step, kind of like I was doing in the wizard automatically. And then I'm going to toggle visibility on the other one. So I just have this helper function that flips back and forth visibility for the divs. And now I don't have any server code. I've sent everything I want down to the client in that second model of Ajax development where you're trying to put everything down there and control it in JavaScript. And I get the same kind of experience without round trips to the server. Pick my touring bike, pick that I want silver or black, and I'm getting entries just like I did from controlling it from the server without any interaction to the server until I'm done selecting data and post it all up. Okay, so Ajax navigation. This is in the CTP that'll be out in a few weeks. The other thing we've looked at, how many people have done a view source and looked at their Ajax page? Really? Or are people just getting tired? Not that many? One of the things people have noticed and said, hey, what are you doing? Is we have a bunch of different script entries for different pieces of script you want. This actually gets even worse the more custom controls you use that are trying to take advantage of Ajax functionality on a client. What we're adding is script combining, which will be a way to improve performance for this. So right now, and in this example, I just have a few scripts, but what you don't realize until you start looking at it really closely is that those script elements are actually retrieved serially by the browser. So it goes back in a single connection and gets a script, and it gets the next script, and it's slow, and people have performance problems, and then they start clicking on stuff on your website, but the script isn't downloaded yet, and they get an error, and they don't know what to do. What we're doing is saying you can get to a point where your page is developed, and you can have us go in and look at the scripts that are registered. So this is an active step because you'll have dynamically ways that you can register script on the fly. So this isn't a static analysis of it. This is a runtime event where you say, take a look at this page, it's running, help combine scripts for me, and then you end up with the browser needing just a single request for that script. There's a bunch more involved here in terms of being able to grab the scripts, persist them, cache them. You get a big benefit, both client and server, being able to do this. That's work that we're still doing. Will be in the next release, not in this upcoming CTP. All right, in our grab bag of different things we're working on, Silverlight controls. So as I said, the team is working on Silverlight 1.1 features as well as new Silverlight controls. Briefly, the Silverlight 1.1 code is all focused on enabling things to be richer for development when using Silverlight. Silverlight 1.0 primarily targets the fact that you can use XAML with some other key events and interop that you can code up. 1.1 simply takes that to the next level, where you have a client-side cache you can manipulate with easy APIs. It'll let you write C# event handlers for browser DOM events. Vice versa, you can have JavaScript access scriptable objects within the Silverlight that you've declared. So you get this kind of interop layer of working with the JavaScript, the browser, and Silverlight elements. The Silverlight controls are designed to make it easier to work with Silverlight from an ASP.NET developer standpoint. There's two controls, the first being the Silverlight control. The first challenge you have when using Silverlight is you have to make sure it's on the machine. So you can write some custom JavaScript that checks for it, pulls down a Silverlight JS file that can help you instantiate it. We simply automate that here. We also have some client and server classes for working with Silverlight more readily. So you can instantiate it, install it, and then interact with it in terms of elements that are there being available in JavaScript. And let's take a look at a demo of that. So I have a website with Silverlight controls. And I have a confession that I don't know XAML very well at all. So take it as a given that someone, and I confess it wasn't me, went into a tool like Expression and created what you can see here is a whole bunch of XAML. The great thing about the tools is that you're not writing a bunch of that code. They're making it for the designer really easy to come up with really rich elements to render with Silverlight. Then we have some somewhat ugly JavaScript that sets up a bunch of interop here for my controls, and ultimately registers that I have all of this code that is a custom calculator implemented in JavaScript, and that it inherits from sys.ui Silverlight control. So sys being the client namespace, that top-level namespace we have for our Ajax objects. So that Silverlight control takes care of everything we need automatically for running Silverlight. And if we go look at the file, the ASPX file itself, all I've had to do is say, I want to reference that Silverlight control script file. I want that big set of calculator JavaScript that lets me do floating point math in JavaScript. It doesn't even have a decimal place, but. And then I say, I want a Silverlight control, and you can give it parameters like the height, the width, the scale mode, and you can tell it on the client, I want you to treat this as that custom calculator type that's in my JavaScript file. So you bring together a XAML that you create with the tool, JavaScript you may want to have to interact with the XAML elements, and then you just tell it, okay, I have that XAML, I have that JavaScript, take care of it for me. And when you run it, I simply have all of the background work taken care of for me that I need in order to be using Silverlight in the client. The other thing that we're adding, the other control, leverages the 1.0 capabilities of Silverlight for playing video. So, in the first example, I have a media player control. It's our other Silverlight control. And here I've said some of the basics of, hey, I want it to play automatically. I have some height. There's the Windows Media video file I want you to use. And we have a variety of skins, so you can pick from some reasonable set of defaults that work in your website. And with just that, I then am able to take care of playing the video without having to worry about anything else. And you wouldn't believe that after a while, you get really sick of hearing the same video over and over and over again. The team periodically changes whatever we're using to work on it because you get sick of Daffy Duck videos or Xbox ads or the rest of it. What's also interesting here is that that was a pretty basic looking one. Our expression line of products makes it really easy to do really rich things. So following along the line with that, I got to type it correctly. We have an expression skin. And when we use that, we see that we get a much richer version of the same. Maybe we should just mute that. Oh, that's built in for us. We get this hover control here. We get ability to scan forward to markers in the text. Much nicer. Pause automatically. I didn't have to click it to activate it. It just is all built in for me. Nice. But if I want to start doing more things with it, does it become much more complicated? Perhaps I have chapters I want people to navigate through, because most of your videos are probably longer than a 30-second spot advertising Xbox. So in here, I've simply defined, I have media chapters, I have a position within the file, oh, and I have thumbnail markers that used to represent that. Now, the way we created these was we used a new tool coming out called Media Encoder, and we actually just told it, at this point and this point and this point, break it up into chapters, and oh yeah, please go ahead and pull out thumbnails and spit them out on disk for me. So they make this much easier. And now, I have a little more information that is automatically taken care of for me. Again, I have this. See, you get pretty annoyed with the same thing pretty quickly. And now I have chapters I can select from that are automatically hovered over for me from simply defining them inside the file. Following on from that, we can say, I have my chapters, but now I want to have captions in it. Again, going into Media Encoder, you can give captions to your video that will transition automatically. We didn't have to do anything new here. We just pointed to a different version of the file where Media Encoder had put in captions for us that we defined. And now I look at it, and we get the media player. Maybe I should mute the machine here. We see that we get black is the best color, case color and size, other captions going that you may want to have for somebody in various videos. Okay, much better. And again, as an ASP.NET developer, I didn't have to do anything but go into Media Encoder and say, layer in some captions for me, and it took care of the rest. But it's a global world, and I may want to change those captions on the fly. So what I've got here is, in this example, I've created a set of resource files that have those captions in different languages. French, English, Japanese, and I've now gone in and said, when you reach one of those markers within the file, call my event. So this is built into the media player, that it can look for those markers that have been defined, and you can react to them. So in onMarkerReached, I have code. Here's code so that I just have the player. I don't have to keep looking for it. And on MarkerReached, I get what the marker is. If that marker is the caption type that was defined by Media Encoder, then I say set the caption on it, and this is using functions to go back and forth between Silverlight. And I go, yeah, I would like resources. And the ASP.NET AJAX library takes care of pulling those resources down based on the preferences of the user. They're automatically sent down within the script. So now instead of having the captions embedded directly in the file, I have captions that it's controlling based on events being reached here. Well, I still have English. So if I go in here and lie and say that my French is really good and I prefer French, and then take a look at it, it now gives me captions in French without any code changing on the server. It's automatically sent down the right set of resources. And they're just defined here. We can go grab the German version. And it simply said, here's the different captions I want to use. ASP.NET AJAX library takes care of looking at what the preferences are from the browser and sending the appropriate resources if it has them. Now, bringing some of this all together, a little more complicated example, says I have my media player, I have my onMarkerReached, I now also have some source XAML associated with the file, and when the marker is reached, that XAML is available, and I can have onMarkerReached, I can say, oh, if it's a different marker type for animate, go run my code that animates. You also see that I'm using the AJAX library to do debugging info and interacting with the Silverlight content again to get the element and start running the animation. So I've layered on top of the Silverlight player, based on things happening in it, the fact that it needs to animate things. I'm going to run that and see that it starts pulling up other information. So you can imagine you can do advertising or other call-outs based on content that you're working with. And that's the basics of what we're building for Silverlight. The advantage of the media player is that you get instant access to content. If that wasn't obvious from this, it has been the focus of our interaction with the 1.0 release. The 1.1 release of Silverlight, we're taking that again to the next level so that you can have interop between managed code and the DOM elements and events in the browser. Yeah, we already demoed that. Dynamic data scaffolding. So dynamic data, how many people have seen the Blink prototype? Just a few. How many have seen the Oryx prototype that followed on after that? Just a few. Okay, this is what has evolved out of that based on your feedback, but there were just a few, so just a few people's feedback. For being what we want to do next to enable people to get up and going quickly with a customizable view of data. The scaffolding app for dynamic data gives you an instant web application. We'll walk through an example. Literally within a few seconds, you have a fully fledged web app. It does input validation for you using validators based on the metadata of your data model. So instead of needing to go through and customize everything based on specifics, you get a fairly rich set of reflection from the data type. So for example, if you have ranges, you can add those on. But for things like this is a numeric type, you get that validation automatically. It's AJAX enabled, so you can do things like add slider controls to say I'm giving them a range. So I can validate with the range validator the range is there, and I can also have an extender attached to the view that lets me control something richer. So let's build one of these from scratch. So I say I want to do a new project. And in the web category, I want to do a dynamic data web application. And we'll call it fast data. All right, and what I have is a scaffolding that will take care of the data for me. First, I need some data. So I have the AdventureWorks database. I can go put it in my app data folder. Give that a second. And now what I'll need to do is add a data model to it. I add a new item, and I say that I want a link. Let's see. Link to SQL classes. We can call them, it's AdventureWorks. So it goes and creates the classes for me. I can go into my Server Explorer and define what I want included in those classes. And we'll say in the tables, no, I'm clicking the wrong thing. We'll say I'm just going to go ahead and add all my tables. Note that this means I'm now exposing all my tables, but not directly. First, what I need to do is turn it on. Again, when it comes to exposing data automatically for people, we have a pretty strong set of consensus from people that you shouldn't do this without making people explicitly opt in. Save that. And I'll need to go to my web config. I go to the section for dynamic data, and go to enable templates and say, yes, please turn on the scaffolding for me. And just like that, I have a website. Oh, data context type section. Data context type. Did I accidentally delete that? It's AdventureWorks. Let's make sure I get the right type here. Fast data, AdventureWorks data context. And see if I need it fully qualified or not. Apparently. All right. Now, I have a view of my data where I can navigate through and it understands the relationship for the database based on the model. See that I have my bikes again. I can automatically edit the data and make updates here. I can go view all of the products. Again, we can see that long set of mountain bikes. And you get a fairly rich set of constructs already for viewing the data. Now we're looking at products table here. We can see that there may be some ways I would want to customize this. So let's go look at what the dynamic data site actually did for us to get us to a point where we have one initial view. So I have in my app shared a set of dynamic data fields. These are a bunch of user controls, so you can customize them yourself, that represent basic types that would be in your data model. And since they're just user controls, they have familiar constructs that you can customize easily. Now if we go and say, for example, that I have metadata here that I want to customize, and say we copy the date time, change it to my own date time. Now I have a new data type that I can work with, where I might want to say, what I really want here is the data value dot to short string, right? So if I cast this as a date time, because it doesn't know yet that it's a date time that's coming in, I say I want to short string. All right. Now I have a custom data type. And in order to use that, I would need to go into a class that interacts with the data model. So I can make a new partial class. And I can say, well, let's really rename this though. Code file. We're looking at the products table, so let's call it products. And I can get public class, partial class, products. And I don't need more than that before I can start saying, what I'd really like to do is have a, how come I didn't get all my usings? Let me go copy those from elsewhere. We'll go into where I have some demos and dynamic data. And I want to have app code. I'll steal these. Put those in there. We're using web dynamic data, which should mean that we now get well, I got something going wrong here because I'm not getting the IntelliSense. Add new one. Well, let's go to the functional version and go with that instead, so you don't see me trying to type around and move things into app code. Open website, add dynamic. And we can see it in here. a render hint, and I tell it that for the field name, what were we looking at? Let's make this one shorter. The cell start date. My shop's never open in the middle of the night, so I tell it that I want to make that a short date. And the type I want it to use is my date time. Recompile, take a look at it. And now I see that we have products. And then I've customized that to now use my own custom rendering for that field. So you get control of being able to say, I'm going to move it around so that I can customize different types. The other customization that we should look at right off the bat are that you get a set of dynamic data pages as well. So if we look at what we're viewing here, it's list details. So the basic types it's got are details template, list details template, and the list template. So I can come in here, and if I wanted to reskin this to do something different, anything, again, since it's just an ASPX page, I can come into the content and put anything I want. I go, I'm going to put custom data goes here. Now I'm just breaking it. Wrong place to put it, because it's contained. We'll put it in a place that is not going to get reinterpreted. Custom data goes here, and then run it. Oh, now I've broken it from putting other things in there. Well, so you can see the classes here. I won't belabor you with trying to find where I've broken it by putting it in the wrong place. You get the ability to customize the whole look of the site beyond just what is used for individual data types, but you also get the ability to customize the templates themselves for the pages. Okay, so we looked a little bit at the metadata that drives the UI. We didn't jump into a lot of depth with the fact that you have things like the validators that are built in. You see those in the user controls. We saw that you can start changing things like render hint to tell it, please use this custom type for types represented in my metadata. You can control things like whether or not you can navigate to related entities. You also get the ability to do things specifically with the display, like change formats, switch which columns are displayed for specific items. And we looked a little at that already. Custom validation, there's another option here because of using the back-end data model, where you can pull in a partial class and do validation at that layer. So while interacting with the model, you have events for when things are being updated, and you can say in code what other custom validation you want to do. If you throw an exception, which is the pattern for extending the partial classes in LINQ to SQL, those exceptions are caught by the dynamic data templates and fold right into the regular validation operations of ASP.NET. So they become part of your validation summary on the client page. Now we can take a look at it here if we have a partial class. Pardon? Oh, sorry. And we can say, hey, I have this method for color changing that you would put right in here. And this exception, that I don't like yellow bikes. If anybody tries to change a color to a yellow one, I won't have it and you throw the exception. And we're still going to have the problem of however I broke this before, unless it's recompiled out. There we go. And if I go into products, and I say I'm going to edit this, should be a forbidden yellow bike. And you see I get integration with ASP.NET validators already. In this page, it has a validation summary. It pulls the exception message that I threw, highlights the point where the problem is, and includes it in the validation summary. Okay, one of our last new features we're working on has been a while in the coming. We've been experimenting with this. We've been gathering feedback. We've been looking at what people like about different model view frameworks, things that they don't like. We've been trying to address it here. The model view controller framework is designed to embrace a pattern that's been around for several decades that lets you completely separate your data model from the view that you provide a user after going through some kind of controller action. So a request comes in, and the controller is responsible for things like UI validation or data entry validation, updates to the data, and preparing whatever is needed by the view. The view is really just UI. You can have a designer that has more skills than some of the server developers that I work with, make something that looks good, and then the logic can all be controlled by you in a controller interacting with the data model. One of the things people really like about the framework is that in a model view controller framework, you can control the URL. So instead of having a lot of query parameters being passed around, you can have things very clean so that they're available to search engines in a more optimized way. You get full control over the markup also that you render. So you can have URL links that you then do cross-page, this kind of thing, that are more intuitive for what people see in the browser. A key tenet of the MVC framework is that it is entirely extensible. So at every stage during the processing of a page, of a request, you can pull out and put in your own controller. You can put in your own URL router rewriter. You can put in your own view render engine. The defaults right now are that it renders an ASPX page, but that can be changed. When you get into some of the more complex things that people fold in with MVC frameworks, then you get the ability to plug those in too. Things like the Windsor library for inversion of control. So even beyond this, we're making changes in the core system web page lifecycle so that something like HTTP response, HTTP request, HTTP context are all being replaced by interfaces for those so that you could provide mock objects to enable better testing. That's also one of the things people really like about the MVC pattern is that you can do test-driven development, test the actions on your controller completely separate from worrying about what the final rendering looks like. You validate that the data that you're preparing and your interaction with the data model and business objects is correct, and you leave the view rendering to the page itself. Our framework uses ASP pages now, ASPX pages, so you get all the support that you're used to in Visual Studio now. IntelliSense, refactoring, you get richer debugging, and we have project templates for making it easy to get up and going with an MVC framework. Of course, we have great integration with ASP.NET, the static languages you're used to, and we're doing additions to make dynamic language support available as well. So if you want to work with your MVC framework in Ruby, you'll be able to do that. This is not a wholesale replacement for ASP.NET. Some of the people we started talking to within Microsoft about it said, "Well, wait, I don't see what you're doing with this. You have web forms, and now you have this thing alongside it. What about all those features that I liked about web forms?" Core infrastructure is still there. The page lifecycle at its heart is still gives you access to things like profile data, the ability to cache and store session state. Okay, let's do the Hello World demo and take a look at what we have with an MVC application. I have MVC here, and I open it up. The first thing to notice, I'll show you the one I've already built since we're running out of time, is almost everything you see here is in the default template. So let's walk through a little bit what's there. Of course, the AdventureWorks is added. The default ASPX, you notice that I'm looking at now, is completely empty. Because the view is separate from what's actually rendered by the controller, you can have an ASPX page that somebody requests and reroute it to something else. So in this example, we have default ASPX doesn't actually have anything in it. In the global ASAX, we define the routes. So in here, the 3 default routes simply take whatever kind of controller is requested, and this is essentially a regular expression to match a controller. You wouldn't replace this, though. This is just identifying where in the URL pattern the controller is. You could have .mbc after it. You could put .foo after it. Doesn't matter. Then the action is specified along with optional ID, and you can have defaults specified as you set up the route. So this says anything that ends in .mbc along with an action after it. I want to route to an action called index. It derives the controller from the URL. Same thing for the rest of these, where it says the controller is specified here, the action is specified here, I don't need a .mbc. And here's what I was referring to with the default.aspx. What this demonstrates is that anybody requesting default.aspx, what I actually want to give them is the home controller, which is the default, and I want the action to be indexed. So if we go take a look again at this, then we have a home controller. This is a default, where, for example purposes, we have this little bit of company info here. You can see that what we're doing is populating an object and then passing it in our call to render view. The default index there just has some basic company info. The view itself are held here in views, where we have corresponding, we had a home controller, we also have home views. And it'll look for these by well-known name. If you have the foo controller, it'll look for a folder called foo that has views available to it. And I say that I have the index. It's still using core ASP.NET features like master pages, and it's just saying welcome. Now, in this case, I've gone directly to index.aspx. So in the URL routing, said we don't want people to be able to go directly to the view pages themselves. This is contrary to MVC. We're actually catching that and telling you not valid. In this case, it's trying to get view data. There is no view data because you have to go through the MVC pattern to get there. So if we follow the patterns that we looked at, what we really said was that if somebody requested default.aspx, that they would get that index view. We also said that if they specified that it was the home controller and that they wanted the index action to happen, then they would get that view. And the .mbc is also caught and rerouted. This data is coming from the master page that's in the default. So we said we'd do hello world. Well, we have the basics here, but that was all still in the defaults. So if we switch to here, we see that I've added a hello ASPX page, not even using a code behind. I say that it's inheriting from view page, and that I'm going to take whatever the message is that they hand me and display that. And in the controller itself, I've added an action that we specify with this attribute. Say, if they've specified the action as hello, then I want the message to be hello world, and then call that render view and pass it that view data to give them access to this message. If I go back to the browser, see I get home, hello, and I get my hello world message. All right, so that's the basics of hello world. Wrapping it up, we get that the browser makes a request to the web server. It's routed to a controller, in this example, products. That interacts with my backend data model to do whatever validation and retrieval I need. And then I render just a list.aspx page. I can further pull other information, like what action I want to do, like edit, pass it parameters like 5, and that goes to a different, potentially a different view that takes care of it for me. URL routing we looked at. We also have a template built right in there so that you can start adding tests. We talked about the key that test-driven development is what people tend to embrace with MVC, as it gives them advantages not trying to test the page itself. So the new features will be out in December 2007. Work is just being wrapped up on it now. I can't emphasize this slide enough. As you look at these CTP features and start playing with them, we want your feedback, what you like and what you don't like, what you'd like to see changed. And with that, let's go into Q&A. If they have questions, just shout it out, or we'll break for lunch. All right? Yeah. Have we considered improving testability for plain web forms?
Yeah,
yes, we're still actively looking at things we can do to make it easier there, including things like performance testing. In this release, we don't have anything new in the CTP for it. Other questions?
Hello?
Yes?
One question about the dynamic controls. Here, just in the middle. Hello.
Okay.
What about foreign key CTM values? Drop-down list there, automatically generated.
Ability to do custom things in the dynamic controls, like drop-down list, you said?
Yep.
Yeah, the dynamic data controls is really just a set of user controls and then these pages that that utilize them based on the metadata. So you can pull in things like a drop-down list for a foreign key relationship. It already does for you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and another question. Model view controller and Ajax, we haven't seen any demo, so I don't know how that behaves.
Oh, model view controller with Ajax?
Yeah.
Yeah, currently we're still adding support for richer things with Ajax. The key difference that we have are things like an update panel. No longer would make sense in an MVC page because they're trying to do postbacks back to the page itself. So we'll need some modifications there so that you can say, oh, I'm going to post data potentially to a controller that understands posted data, can do the right things with it, and then give you a response. So there'll be changes both client and server in order to have Ajax more enabled with MVC. Nothing in this first CTP. We'll have a follow-on release that'll have additional support.
And what about the script services and MVC? How does it fit in the model?
What about what with MVC?
Script services.
That's still in here, sorry.
Script services.
Oh, script services. Yeah, those will still work the same way, where we'll be able to do script coalescing, combining kind of thing, and send them down. Services as well, where you can go invoke them remotely. We'll have proxy support that'll let you invoke the services, take care of the data on the client. Those kind of things aren't affected. This is really about a complete separation of concerns on the server, where you have model, view, and controller, and no longer embed the logic of your application in the ASPX page itself. The ASPX page is simply a rendering engine that lets you take care of the data passed to it from the controller.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, I have a question as well. The MVC model essentially that you're using is very exciting to hear now that finally we have, technologies that are by design testable. We do a lot of test-driven development, so of course this is, right in the right direction. The question I have is, there are other competing frameworks like monorails, for example. One of the problems with those is, of course, the view is really just HTML, right? So is it a wrong assumption to assume that you will modify controls to have a kind of a drag and drop, experience, essentially as tool support, again, from those views, or?
Yeah, so question about tooling support for MVC. We'll have, in the longer term, we'll have better support for creating tests. Right now, the problem is you need a mock framework that goes with it, so you can do a test and have things like the HTTP request and response, and it's totally pluggable at this point, so you can just put something like Windsor in and start getting things going. But in the long run, we want to make sure that it's easy for people to pick the framework they want and plug it in. So in terms of competing technologies, things like HTML rendering, you can also switch so that your action could invoke a render engine that's doing pure XML from a database. You would simply say, where you created your controller, here's the view, or in the controller, when you went to do render view, you would change that out for a different render engine than ASPX page. You'd have it invoke custom code that did it.
So are we going to see something very soon in terms of at the level where you were showing, I suppose, right now? Is that on the next TCP or the one that follows?
So in the next CTP, coming in a few weeks, will be basically those features as you see them today. Follow on, we're trying to do them every few months. So as we continue pushing forward with tooling and things that are missing right now.
Thank you.
Sir?
Okay, Matt, I need your comment on this. I think Microsoft is adding pretty cool and easy to use features, but at the same time, they are adding extra complexity on the back layers, which will end up with worse and slower performance. Is it true?
We have always a struggle as we add new features, and this one I felt the personal pain. If you go in, and soon you'll be able to do this in source code format. We've announced that we're releasing sources, so you'll be able to step right through framework code in your pages. If you go look at the base control class, when we went from version 1.1 to 2.0, it had a bunch of new features added. And we do a lot of work to ensure that if a feature should be pay for play, then you have to turn it on in order to pay any kind of performance for using it. And then because we were adding some things like the adapter infrastructure in 2.0 that we wanted to just be available without having to go configure it, we needed some set of overhead there. We did things like you'll see that we have in the control, it references something called rare fields or occasional fields, and then occasional fields has a reference to something called rare fields. We looked at the memory footprint, what we were actually doing on the server, said, there's a collection of items that we don't use by default. We'll pull them out, fault them in as we need. So I think the answer to your question of the added complexity and the trade-off, that if you look at new versions as we bring them out, we're being really careful to not impact existing apps. Things like the MVC framework will live right alongside existing applications, not affected at all.
Okay.
Hi, I had a question over the original Ajax CTPs that you had. You put client-side binding in, which sort of fed into the futures stack.
Yep.
That seems to have kind of gone away, or doesn't seem to be kind of being featured heavily. Where are you going with the sort of client-side data binding?
So the client-side data binding, so actually it should still be there. At this point in the last futures release, client-side data binding is one of those, in my little animation that had some stuff goes into the .NET framework and some of it stays in the futures and some of it we want to put out on Codeplex or something for people. The client-side data binding, we still haven't arrived at what we think is the right model. We've had a fair amount of feedback of, we should have a really solid model, because again, it comes back to web apps are typically a projection of data, and people want to be able to move that down a client, party on it down there without going back to the server all the time. The model we have currently, we're not really sold on. So we haven't evolved it much, and it's still in futures for the short term. Longer term, we're working with another half of our team, essentially, that is looking at what we do for a client-side data binding model for Silverlight. Right now with Silverlight, there isn't really a solid model there. They're still missing some of the core controls you'd need to do line of business apps. So they're approaching it there. We're going to look at it for what we could use for that same model on Ajax. So we have something common that we could use across the client and potentially even bring that into, you can do that kind of data binding on the server. So you're right, it hasn't evolved. It's just been sitting there. It's not because work hasn't been going on to try to figure out what the right model is, but we've never felt like the model that was there is something we're ready to bring into the framework.
Yeah, I mean, so is that going to be in sort of like Silverlight 1.1 time frame, or is that post Silverlight 1.1?
Probably Silverlight 1.1 plus some delta before we have the full model in place. Some of the Silverlight 1.1 work that's already underway is about this core infrastructure that's independent of some of the control features, like framework features you'd have on top. It's things like instantiating it, marshaling objects. You can mark objects as being scriptable, and they'll be marshaled automatically between JavaScript and managed code. So the 1.1 release for us is a lot of focus on infrastructure. At the same time, we're building framework things like data binding on top. Schedule-wise, the framework stuff on top is probably 1.1 plus a delta. I haven't even seen at this point when we think we'll have a CTP of it out. They're working hard, but I don't think they've got a schedule for when they can share it yet.
Okay, thank you.
Will the CTPs be on top of 2008 or 2005? 2008 is where we're going with it. Primarily because .NET Framework features for us, a lot of our work is focused on runtime things, and for us, it's 2.0 service pack is where we are right now in .NET Framework 3.5. So it's 2.0 plus a service pack plus these new features. And as we go to add more on top of it, in fact, you'll see this CTP is actually replaces in your GAC system web extensions, which is part of .NET Framework 3.5. And for the short term, we replace it within the CTP a version called System Web Extensions 3.6. Ultimately, I think we'll end up shipping as being an update to 3.5.